Welcome, everyone. I'm Mary Ellen Miller. I'm chair of the League of Women Voters, Upper Mississippi River Region, ILO. It's a mouthful. We affectionately call ourselves UMR to shorten it. We're really excited to have you all with us. This is our largest registration for one of our programs that we've ever had, but we are certainly aware that data centers are a hot topic, not only in the upper Midwest, but across the country. We're seeing a lot of interest and concern about them, especially at the local level. We're going to hear from some great presenters tonight. Before we move to that, though, just some housekeeping things. This will be recorded, is being recorded. It will be available on our website afterwards in a few days. We invite local league members to use this recording as program for your local leagues, especially if you have an environmental focus. We also record and have on our website past webinars. So there's quite a wealth of resource out there for you to use. Also, we are thankful for our local league unit members. And just a reminder that dues are due. So if you haven't paid or don't know if your local league is paid, please check with them and make sure they have. For those new, we cover 5 states: Missouri, Iowa, Minnesota, Wisconsin, and Illinois. And we have approximately 80 some or 90 some potential local league units as members. And the report we got at our board meeting just now is we have about maybe 60 that have paid their dues. We live on that. They are our only source of revenue other than what we raise outside, so we appreciate the support. We're now up to, according to mine, 93 people, so people will continue to come in. Again, thank you for being here. I'm now going to turn the program over to the chair of our wonderful action committee, very hardworking chair, Kay Slama. Take it away, Kay.
You are muted, Kay.
Gretchen, I'm hoping you'll spotlight those of us who are speaking. I still see a load of people's pictures on there. Would you all please turn off your video and mute yourself? That way you can see the speakers better. Peg Furshong is responsible for cures, constituent relations, and special projects. These projects include water sustainability, landowner and community engagement for CURE's No Carbon Pipelines campaign, and coordinating outdoor engagement. Previously, PEG built the organization's nature-based educational and experiential engagement programs, including initiatives like the Tallgrass Prairie BioBlitz and Freshwater Mussel Field Days. She also established CURE's lasting partnership with the Minnesota Master Naturalist Program, where she continues to serve as a volunteer instructor. Peg is a graduate from Montana State University Billings with a Master of Science in Education Leadership with an emphasis in information, process, and communication. She is a volunteer commissioner for the Greater Minnesota Regional Parks and Trails Commission. In 2025, she was appointed to the Minnesota Attorney General's Task Force on the Future of Minnesota's Water. Sara Mooradian is CURE's Government Relations and Policy Director. She works on issues related to false climate solutions, rural electric cooperative siting and local power, clean transportation, and natural and working lands, participating in processes before state agencies like the Public Utilities Commission and at the state legislature. Previously, Sara clerked for the Minnesota Court of Appeals. She has also worked on projects concerning tribal rights and land management, northern Minnesota mining, and New England surface water use. Sara is a graduate of the University of Minnesota with degrees in journalism and sociology, and of Vermont Law and Graduate School with a JD and a Master of Environmental Law and Policy. She is passionate about protecting the environment and believes that success comes in part from changing both public policy and societal attitudes about nature. please put your questions for Peg and Sarah in the chat box, and I'll ask them those questions at the end.
All right, I'll go ahead and share my screen, make sure we're all good, and then I'll let Peg take it away.
Thanks, Sarah. Wow, what an evening. I don't know what it's like in the other states, but up in Minnesota, we've got winter storm advisories and freezing rain, so it's been kind of an interesting day, but we're really happy to be here today with all of you. As Kay said, my name is Peg Furshong, and my colleague Sara and I are here to talk to you a little bit tonight about data centers and the impacts on water that they have. Next slide, please. So Cure is a nonprofit that's been around since the early 90s. And we're located in the Minnesota River Basin. And our roots are in water. We started in water, but over time, our work has became broader and more involved with areas of energy, rural democracy, water, of course, and connecting people with the outdoors. Next slide, please. When we think about water in Minnesota, I should say, I realize that there's multiple states that are on tonight. And when we were trying to figure out how we were going to present this work, we realized that the major issues around water transcend all the states. Some of the examples we're going to give you tonight are relevant to Minnesota, but our work is informed by our partners and colleagues from around the country. So we hope that the information that we share with you is information that will easily transcend your questions in your own local areas. In Minnesota, being the headwaters of the Mississippi, there's a lot of assumptions about water. So when we think about those assumptions, Minnesota is a land of 10,000 lakes. So we have our identity in water. Nibi bima diziwen, water is life. Water is abundant. Unfortunately, in Minnesota, water is also impaired. And in some parts of our state, water is scarce. Next slide, please. Data centers is an interesting topic at Cure because it really transcends all the work that we do. Our work is really at the nexus of climate, energy, water, and community, or rural communities particularly. And we find data centers right at the center of all of that. Next slide, please. Sara.
I have to unmute myself. All right. So just kind of a quick ice-breaking activity here. We know that we sent out two fact sheets, or at least one fact sheet, kind of to help you guys get acclimated to some of the basics of data centers. But we like this activity for you to just kind of think to yourself, in the last 24 to 48 hours, what interactions have you had that might have involved data centers? So we'll give you, 10, 15, 20 seconds to just kind of think to yourselves. We're keeping the chat open for questions only, so just kind of keep that in mind. Hopefully it should be pretty easy. And then, so some of the things you might have written down or thought about, your cell phone, visiting a website, using GPS, making an online purchase. I just bought something online that will hopefully be delivered to my house soon. So I just used a data center. Going to the grocery store, using Alexa or Siri, any of the streaming services, driving assist, writing an email with ChatGPT, or any of those kind of new functions for AI, and even the Zoom call we're on today, all use data centers in some way. So this is just kind of trying to, making the point that it's not just these big buildings in a field somewhere that do something with computers. These are actually impacting different aspects of our lives every day. And so, although, like Peg said, although we're based in Minnesota and a lot of our work is happening there, this is a problem. This is an issue that is being seen across the US. So here in Minnesota, a lot of worries about groundwater, which we're here to talk about today. But I'm sure lots of you have seen in your own states across the country articles about kind of data center development. So there are different types of data centers. It's really important to know that data centers have been around in some form or other for decades, here in Minnesota, across the country. But what we're really seeing and what we're focusing on these days are these hyperscale data centers. So often hundreds of thousands of square feet in size, using more than 100 megawatts of power. Um, so they're big, big, big facilities. They're doing things that are more along the lines of like AI rather than data storage, in the traditional sense. So just wanted to kind of give you a little bit of overview on data centers, but really focusing in on hyperscale data centers here in Minnesota. The US is a global leader in the number of data centers. You can see in that graph, hopefully on the side there, hopefully my little boxes aren't in the way, that we are far and away the leader there. A lot of them are in Northern Virginia. And by 2030, data centers are expected to be 10% of overall US energy consumption. Data centers are among the top most water consuming industrial users in the US, but only about 50% of data centers track their water usage. So we've got a couple maps here coming up. This is about just where data centers are located. Again, driving home that point that we've got a lot of them already in the United States. So you can see here, this is the part of Virginia I was talking about that is just kind of data center central right now. You can see color-coded active, or these kind of teal color, expanding the red, and then planned in the purple. So here you can see kind of in the region we're in, a lot in Minnesota, Illinois, around Chicago area, and then also in Iowa. So active and planned data centers projected to be built through 2029 would add a total of 93 gigawatts of electricity demand. So for those who are maybe not, what is a gigawatt of energy? So a large power plant here in Minnesota, one of our nuclear plants here, generates about 600 megawatts of electricity. So that's like a big power plant. So 93 gigawatts is significantly larger. It's many, many, many times over. We're talking about just an almost unfathomable amount of energy that we'd be adding if all of these were built. And then this is another interesting map about where data center infrastructure is located in the United States. And so this is just really about transmission lines and about fiber optic lines. And so Peg and I were just on an earlier call that showed a really great detailed map about in Minnesota where some of our hyperscale data centers are being located or sited, where they might be sited, and they're exactly along these transmission lines. And so that's an interesting feature we're seeing, is that data center developers are coming in and they're looking at transmission and fiber optics, not necessarily other things like water, which is obviously what we're here to talk about today. But this is just kind of laying the groundwork of what kind of is all incorporated in data centers.
Thanks, Sarah. So when we think about data centers in Minnesota, as Sarah had said, we've had data centers for a very long time, a couple decades in Minnesota. We have about 60 data centers right now in 8 different markets. And if you look at where those markets are, they typically are near transmission lines. Those are some of the needs. But when we think about when developers are looking at coming to your community or your state, they're looking for not only transmission lines, but they're looking for broadband, as Sarah had said. They also might not be thinking about this on the front end, but other things that are needed for data centers are workforce, also access to precious minerals, and of course, water. So in Minnesota, currently right now, we have about a dozen hyperscale data centers on deck. And they're from some of the top developers in the world, actually. So you're thinking Amazon, Google, Track, Meta, or the parent company for Facebook. There's others as well. These are the communities right now that are on deck here in Minnesota. Next slide, please. Why does this matter? Like, what are the things that are going to impact you and your state, your community? Certainly energy is required for these data centers. They're very energy consumptive. In some cases, in Minnesota, in one of our counties, CURE does a lot of work with rural electric cooperatives. And in one county, There's a meta project that's being proposed that is actually going to need more electricity than the entire footprint of the rural electric cooperative. So that rural electric cooperative has 197,000 customers. And so that data center is going to need that much energy, doubling that footprint. Water, depending on the type of cooling that the data center is going to use will depend on how much water's needed for the project. The economics are really driving these projects. In many cases, it's what's causing a lot of heartburn in communities because we have non-disclosure agreements. These companies are coming in and promising lots of money through taxes and jobs and community benefit opportunities that rural communities who are struggling to make ends meet see this as a fix to their budgetary issues. And then we've got the community. Oftentimes these developers come in, they don't even identify to the local unit of government who the actual project is for. So they just come in with this hypothetical project. They oftentimes get zoning changed, they get their energy and their water lined up, and the community has no input whatsoever because of non-disclosure agreements. And then after the fact, they find out, and it's causing a lot of issues around transparency in local communities. Next slide, please. So tonight we're going to talk about water. And I just have to tell you, it's a very complicated thing to talk about because there's so many unknowns. A lot of times when these projects come forward to the communities, a lot of the issues around the projects come in and they don't reveal all the details because they're put in as trade secrets. And so they don't want it to become public. And so trying to piece the issues around water together, we've been reaching out to other parts of the country that have been doing these projects longer than we have and figuring out what they've learned so that we're not reinventing the wheel. We know that they're very water intensive, but it depends on the cooling systems, and there's different ways to cool data centers. The other thing that is important to know is that these projects need redundant systems for both energy and water because they have to have access to both energy and water 24/7. If you think about the list that Sara shared with you earlier about things that data centers revolve around, if you think about like a medical complex, our healthcare systems, all of our records for healthcare, almost all of them are stored on data centers. So being able to immediately access those is really important, as well as a lot of our credit card transactions and banking systems are all involved with data centers. So you can see the need for to have access 24/7. Then there's prioritization of access. A lot of times these projects are subsidized by taxpayers, like in Minnesota. There were
You managed to mute yourself somehow, Peg.
Oh.
Oh no, it keeps doing it.
Okay. I had mentioned that they're subsidized by taxpayers. A lot of times, big tech, a decade ago, many states were trying to bring big tech in for economic development and were offering incentives. These are the biggest companies in the world, the richest companies in the world. I don't think we need to be giving them tax incentives to come to our community and give our water away, give, bulk rates for our energy away.
You did it again.
And then there's a lack of oversight. One of the things that's really important to think about is the Great Lakes area in general is the largest body freshwater drinking water supply in the world. And these companies are being pushed out of the South Central Texas area, the West Coast, because they have no water. And they also don't have access to energy either. Because what you need to know is to generate energy primarily with natural gas, but all forms of energy, except for renewables, it takes a significant amount of water. And so without that water, because we know that there's drought, the Colorado River Basin is in drought, the West Coast, the South, they're looking for new places to come. And so they're coming here and they're trying to get established before we really can get our legs under ourselves and put in protective measures. Next slide, please. So this is an example, an illustration that we were able to find that kind of gives you an idea of how water is used. If you look at the left, you can see that water's taken from a source. And this is for the energy generation at the power plant, depending on, what kind of power source they're using. They're using water for their cooling towers there. It's going from the power plant. The energy is coming into the data center. There's just little icon logos there. You wouldn't necessarily have all those in one data center, but those are some of the examples of the companies that have their own data centers. And then they have a loop system that they're running the water through. So they bring the cold water through to cool their systems down. These data center complexes are like as big as 13 super targets. Like their campuses are huge. And the buildings are just full of row after row after row of computer servers. And they generate an enormous amount of heat. And so there's different ways, like I had said, to cool them. You can do a closed loop system. You can also do air cooling through fans. You can bring outside air in. In the northern climates are very desirable half the year because they can pull outside air in and cool with that. And then they also have to circulate the water through the cooling towers, which also generates heat. But you can kind of see it's this whole cycle of use of water. And sometimes the water's once through, and then in these cold loop systems, there's other issues that we need to be concerned about. So in a closed loop system, they have to have really pure water, and they put additives in the water. So one of the things you need to be thinking about, or things you should be making note of, is if it is a closed loop system, there's anti-corrosive chemicals that they're adding to that water, as well as some of those chemicals also come in the F class of PFAS. And it's important to note these things because typically they're descaling chemicals. And so I'm not a scientist, but you can only imagine what they would be putting in that water to keep the minerals from depositing on the coils and the equipment itself. And so when they have to cycle that water out, and we're really not sure, to be honest, I can't tell you how long they how many times they'll use the water before they cycle it out, but they're working with wastewater treatment plants to expel that water. And when they expel that water, it has those chemicals in it. If it's going to a wastewater treatment facility, most of your wastewater treatment facilities are designed to be handling biological waste, like human waste. And so they're relying on an anaerobic process to break down those materials. And if you're putting these descaling chemicals and PFAS chemicals in there, you're diluting that atmosphere that has been created and balanced to break down those biologicals. And then just the sheer amount of water, even if they filter the water at the plant or at the data center before they expel the water to the wastewater treatment plant, the sheer volume of adding that to a wastewater treatment plant, we're learning, disrupts that natural biological makeup to break down those materials. So that's problematic as well. So typically we're seeing wastewater treatment plants have to upgrade their infrastructure, and who bears that cost is important to know. Next slide, please. So we realize that this is a slide that talks about projects in Minnesota, but what we really want to illustrate here is on the left, we've got different companies. If you've got data centers in your state, you're going to see those companies in your state. And then you can see the square footage of their projects if we knew them. In some cases, there's the information hasn't been made available. And then if we know if they're going to be using surface water or groundwater, that's listed. And then the estimated water use, if that's been listed. So in Minnesota, we have a couple different kinds of environmental review, and probably the least stringent is an AUAR, which is an environmental review process that's just a basic assessment for mostly economic development in an industrial park, for example. And this was information that we were able to glean from some of the AUARs in Minnesota. Next slide, please. So as I mentioned before, water quality becomes an issue. The anti-corrosive chemicals are added, so they need to be removed. Again, not all wastewater treatment plants, most of them aren't equipped to deal with these chemicals or the PFAS that is also found in them. And oftentimes ratepayers end up subsidizing this infrastructure at one end of it or another. Next slide, please. Turn it over to you, Sarah.
Perfect. Thank you. So, as you have maybe gathered from the last few slides, there's a lot of unresolved questions we've got. And this is, again, kind of from our perspective in Minnesota, but we're seeing through Peg's work on national groups, just kind of our research who we're talking with, that these are really unresolved questions pretty much countrywide. Are there adequate protections for all resources for communities, but in particular for this presentation, our water resources? Are there, ecosystem stressors that are happening? So I think there's, again, one of the unresolved questions is if any of this water has been, brought through the cooling system, is it warmer than maybe if it's being, directly discharged, is it going to be disturbing any of the local ecosystems, aquatic ecosystems, or just withdrawing it? Is that going to be harming any of the ecosystems around too? There are extreme weather events, so particularly droughts. So if in Minnesota they were having a period of drought in the summer, let's say, to Peg's point earlier, who's kind of getting priority of water use, and how do we decide that? And then the cumulative impacts. A lot of the data centers in Minnesota are kind of being proposed for a pretty small area in one county. And so we're concerned with the fact that nobody seems to be taking a close look at what the cumulative impact of all of those data centers might be on that specific, those communities, that aquifer in general. So Minnesota laws currently, you might have heard some reporting, or you might have heard from legislators in the state if you live in Minnesota, that Minnesota has the strongest and best laws when it comes to data center protections and regulation. I think that's an overstatement. But what we do have is these things that were passed this year at our legislature. So 2 new things were sort of added. We've got a pre-application review. So this says that our Department of Natural Resources, if they're contacted by a data center or a data center developer, they can ask the data center developer for specific information about their project. We have talked to DNR people. They've created kind of this form, this pre-application form for folks to fill out, data centers to fill out, but it's pretty soft language. And importantly, all of the information in this pre-application review is non-public data, so we can't get it through a Data Practices Act request. That's our state level of like FOIA, if you're familiar with the Federal Information Act requests. So it only becomes public information once the developer actually starts the application process. Then we've got new permit conditions. As you can see, I put quotes around those. So data centers don't really have to get a new permit for themselves. We're seeing here in Minnesota that oftentimes they'll try and go and get their water appropriations through a municipality, which kind of circumvents the usual system of our specific Minnesota water appropriations permitting process. So the language in the law that was passed this year does not actually create a new independent permit for a data center. It says if there is a data center that approaches and wants its own permit over a certain threshold, the Department of Natural Resources it should ensure the public health, welfare, and safety are adequately protected, but that's already required by law. It says that water use and energy or efficiency measures should be reasonably considered by the data center developer. There's no enforceable language there. What does reasonably considered mean? How do they have to show that? How will the DNR determine that? We're not sure. Water use conflicts must be addressed. Again, that's already required by law in Minnesota. And the DNR may require an aquifer test to make sure that the aquifer can support whatever this use is. That's already required by law, again, in Minnesota, and is frequently waived by the Department of Natural Resources. So this is why I put those quotes there and am saying if people are telling you to look to Minnesota as kind of like this is the very best you can do, ask for more. Which leads me to my next slide. What's next? So some regulatory considerations. I think these are generally widely applicable. I don't know, I am a lawyer, but none of this is legal advice. And I can't speak to specific state laws besides Minnesota's. But what we're seeing here and what I think is worth considering for your own states, for your own kind of just where you're at is individual water permits. So again, in Minnesota, we're seeing them get them through municipalities. So they're kind of just tagging along if a municipality has, X amount of extra gallons that they can draw from, a data center will say, hey, we'd like to kind of get in on that. And then they don't have to do this individual water permit process that we have here in Minnesota. Also, adequate environmental review. So as Peg said, we have a couple different versions of environmental review in Minnesota that can be pretty strong. And our most stringent form of environmental review, an environmental impact statement, does require the responsible government unit is what it's called, but whoever is the decision-making body saying yes or no to a permit, it requires that body to look at the cumulative impacts of the project. And so water should be included in that. But if the project doesn't trigger an environmental impact statement, if your state doesn't have that kind of thing, or that specific language about a cumulative impact, it might not be considered. Also, water use and quality reporting. So how much is a data center actually using and how are we measuring that? Is it the facility wide? Is it per building? How are we measuring it? How often are we measuring it? And how often are we reporting it? Is that information publicly available? These are all questions that are not very clear right now. And then also water quality. So to Peg's points earlier about the anti-corrosives being added, and then the wastewater question. What is being added in what quantity? How should it be treated? Is it being treated before it's discharged to wastewater, the general wastewater facility? Who's paying for those things? The next point, who's paying for the water and how, when a data center needs water, what is it paying and how much compared to, say, a residential user? So we do bulk rates here in Minnesota. So larger users tend to get water that's cheaper. When you're talking about millions of gallons. There's a question about, especially for some of the wealthiest corporations on the planet, there's a question about equity there. And then also, again, we've talked about prioritization in times of drought, in times of, any issues with water availability, making sure that residential users, critical infrastructure, critical facilities like hospitals need to be higher up than, some of the other uses perhaps like hyperscale data centers. And then making sure that there's water reuse or efficiency measures that are enforceable. So we're learning a lot still about what types of cooling systems are available, what are best for each place. So I think sometimes I'm hesitant to say they must all do X, Y, and Z, but there needs to be some sort of discussion, some sort of proof, some sort of enforceability to make sure that a data center is using the most efficient making the most efficient use of water that they are using. So that's kind of just a really broad list of things that I think states generally should consider when they're talking and thinking about data centers and water use. I think
Hey,
that's it.
Sarah. I just have a couple things that I want to bring back into the conversation really quick. So a couple things to think about that didn't specifically draw out for you, but really want to is The reason why water is so complicated is because water is used in different parts of this process. It's used directly in the process and indirectly in the process. And typically, when a data center developer is coming in, you're only going to be seeing what the direct water use is, and that would be like the water that's used on the data center campus. And the indirect water use would be what is used like at the wastewater treatment plant or what's used to generate the energy. And I've heard lots of different numbers. I've heard anywhere from 60% more to 100% more. It really depends on where the energy is coming from. Is it coming from coal? Is it coming from nuclear? Is it coming from natural gas? Typically, because these centers are coming online so quickly, they don't really have access to easy energy. The quickest energy to pull online short term is natural gas. And so most of our assumptions are being made around natural gas, but they're just assumptions because the unknowns are there and we're just not sure. But if we just look at natural gas, we know generating natural gas energy is very water consumptive. So I think that's an important thing to remember. The other thing that we didn't really clarify when we started this is, as I said before, Minnesota's had data centers for a long time, and Sara had that grid up there of the 4 different kinds of data centers. Not all data centers use this kind of energy or water. The ones that have been around for a really long time that, you know, you likely have in your communities aren't the ones we're talking about. We're talking about the hyperscale data centers that mostly focus on artificial intelligence, you know, so the cars that drive without people or run drones or automate workforces, any kind of system that's thinking or trying to reason. Those are the data centers that are consuming a lot of this water and energy to run. So I think it's important to know that. A couple other things to think about in your community. So as Sara had said, and I had alluded to, is data centers can get their water in different ways. And so when a developer comes to your community, they don't tell your local zoning board that they're a data center. They'll just say, I'm coming here, we're wanting to bring this industry, this is how many square feet they're going to need, this is what, but they don't tell you what kind of business it is or operation it is. They're just generically scoping out the lay of the land to see if they're going to be able to navigate the systems in place to be successful. So as a result, they're often like offering local governments carrots or financial payment. And I think it's important to be thinking about, you know, as a list of things that you could ask for or that you could do. So one thing that you should really consider trying to push for is that they don't get access to water through a municipality, or they have to have a water permit and it's separate. Because in our case in Minnesota, if they're coming through a municipality, it's almost near impossible for the municipality to segment out that one customer typically and manage access to water. I don't know how we're going to do it. We haven't had to do it before. It's going to be interesting to see how they're going to do it. So oftentimes their appropriation for a local municipality is over what they need because they have their drinking water management areas planned out and based on projections for you know, urban sprawl and growth. They usually have an allocation that's over what they need. They're asking just for another well. The city will go and ask for an additional well when a data center comes in, and try to get that under the city's guise. And so we're not really getting a full transparency about how much water is actually going to a data center, even for direct use. And so I think that that's really important. Also, if you're in a rural area, and the data center is going up near private wells, there's also concern about tapping the aquifer in such a way that the high volume withdrawals could have cone depressions and lower water levels for other well users in the area. So it would be a good idea to try to get baseline level readings for water quality and water availability for those private wells. It also begs the issue around generally with data centers. We're seeing a lot more conversation around community benefits, and community benefits is a bear all unto itself. We could do a whole webinar on community benefits, but just related to water, you could be asking that like a data center developer provide a financial fund like a bond, so that if there is contaminations to wells, or if there is wells that go dry, that an individual landowner or homeowner does not have to sue Meta or Amazon because they're not going to be successful and they'll probably bankrupt them. You could ask for a bond, a fund that could be accessed by area residents if there is problems with their wells, so that the protections are in place. Community benefits are there to benefit the community and to protect the community from cumulative impacts and long-term impositions of these projects. Yeah, I know that there's going to be probably lots of questions that you could ask, and so we could talk about this forever. So I think what we want to do is stop and make it open for people to ask questions.
All right, well, thank you. I don't know if people can see me. Okay, bunches of questions. So here's one. You mentioned the workforce, and this question seems to apply to the workforce after construction. What types, how many people, what types of jobs and skill experience levels are involved? Do they target the people from the community that they're settling in, or do they hire from other areas and relocate people, or even have them web in to run the data centers? What happens there with the workforce?
You know, I think that it depends, right? It depends on the type of data center that it is. It depends on where it's located. There's a lot of construction jobs, and because the equipment has to be replaced out on a cycle of every 3 to 5 years because of the corrosive nature of the water and all of that, they'll have a certain number of folks, but they're specialized. And so sometimes they can be from the area, but sometimes they're just from the company and they go from data center to data center. Like Meta might have their own team that goes to different Meta data centers. Because this is all about AI and technology, some of these jobs are remote. They're not on site, but you're going to have physical plant managers. But again, the numbers after construction drop dramatically. Like a major big hyperscale data center might have 1,000 to 1,500 jobs during the construction, the main construction phase. But then you're looking at a couple hundred jobs, maybe like 150, maybe. Once it's actually operational, is what we're understanding.
All right. Some people are asking, how can we make sure that data centers bring their own clean energy? How to get that legislation?
That's a good question. And Illinois is not the only one thinking about that. We're thinking about it here in Minnesota. Oh, I know there are other states. I'm sad
New
that I don't know.
Mexico.
New Mexico. There's several others like this. The acronym I think is very easy for people to remember. It's like Beyonce without the first E. Bring your own new clean energy. So yes, states are thinking about it. I think for better or worse, the energy question seems to be more popular, or what people are kind of catching on to quicker for a lot of the data center regulation or questions. And this issue of water generally, from what I've seen in other states, seems to be like a secondary concern. So,
Okay. Rachel wants to know, are there any entities, states, counties, anything that are on the leading edge of regulation of data centers, and what do they do?
no, I think a lot of the states are really struggling. It's happened so quickly. So Virginia and Northern Virginia, they've had data center, like hyperscale data centers for a while now. I think they were so eager to bring in that kind of new industry and the promise of jobs and economic development that I don't think they had a great handle, and nobody else was doing it like that quickly. So I don't think they're starting to see some of the repercussions of that now. And the rest of us are kind of trying to pick up on it, the rest of us in other states. So certain states are doing certain things. So like there's this Beyonce legislation, or that idea of bringing your own new clean energy. There's bits and pieces everywhere, but I would say nobody has a comprehensive understanding of how to think about data centers, regulate them, how to do it responsibly.
Here's a question from Stephen about where the water goes after it's been used by the data centers. You have said that if it's in a city, it goes to the municipal wastewater treatment plant, but other places is it discharged to the ground, lost to the air through cooling towers? How is the local ecosystem regaining that water?
Also a very good question. It depends on the cooling system in place. There can be as much as more than 50% evaporation, depending on the cooling system. It can be discharged back into surface water, but it has to be treated and the temperature has to be managed really well. It can be discharged to a wastewater treatment plant. In some parts of the country, they require data centers to treat, they actually require data centers to use wastewater, treat it, use it, treat it, and release it. So it's whatever we decide as the people on the ground that we want to see them do, is pretty much what they've had to do, right? And that's why they're leaving other parts of the country. You know, in the South West and in the Gulf area, they're even desalinating water, which is super expensive because they need it to generate the energy and to run the data centers down there. So, you know, we don't want to be giving our natural resources away. So we really need to be smart about how we set up the conditions for their permitting.
Here's a question about where the corrosive materials go after they're removed from the water that the data center has used.
I think that would be just like any normal, like in Minnesota, we have Minnesota Pollution Control Agency that's responsible for discharge. So they would have procedures on how they manage it. But one of the things that we are learning is there is a special PFAS class that this anti-corrosive additive has in it that most of our wastewater treatment plants aren't designed to treat for. And so they are oftentimes going to be needing to upgrade the wastewater treatment facilities if they're choosing to go that route.
Mm.
And I'm
Sounds expensive to the citizens.
and I've just this is not we didn't mention it in kind of our discussion, but this is just reminding me too that there's an element here about e-waste, electronic waste. So as Peg was saying, they have to be renewed like every 3 to 5, not more than 5 years is what I've heard. And so that's additional kind of things that would have to be disposed of somewhere.
Mm-hmm. And there are a number of more comments and questions about, gee, there should be a way to set up a good set of recommendations for data centers that we can get states to adopt, and it should rule out municipalities allowing data centers. I don't know if you have any comment on that comment.
Yeah, I mean, I know Minnesota, so like we're one of the organizations working on ideas for Minnesota at our legislature. I know other state, we have partners in other states who are doing similar things. I think it feels like we're finally starting to kind of get our feet under us across the country, and a lot of us are sharing ideas with each other. So it's happening slowly, slower than I think we'd all like, but there are a lot of people talking about what could happen, what should happen.
Okay. Here's the request from Julie to talk specifically about what's going on in Hermantown because the citizens got hit with all the non-disclosure agreements and had no input.
Yes. So for folks who are not in Minnesota, so Hermantown is a city right outside of Duluth, which you might also not know, up on the North Shore in northern Minnesota. And there's a proposed data center for Hermantown. They did one of these AUAR stands for Alternative Urban Area Wide Review. It's again more for economic development, like if your city town has a lot of land that's maybe not being used or somebody's going to sell. How might you want to develop that land? That's what the AUAR is really for. So they did an AUAR. The city elected officials had signed NDAs with the developers. Um, and so they were kind of, I have seen some of the documents that have been produced through Data Practices Act requests, a lot of back and forth about kind of how, what the data center developers might need, kind of just discussions that were protected and kept from the public until these DPA requests were made about what was going on. So folks are understandably concerned. There is, because there was that AUAR, there isn't the normal process or more stringent process of environmental review that has more opportunities for public engagement, public comment. And the NDAs were signed like they had been talking with the developers for like at least a year, if not two. Um, so a lot of these things are kind of piling up, and people are understandably very upset. They were supposed to talk about it, and the city of Hermantown council was supposed to consider. I can't remember I should know the specific details, but the developer said we're going to wait for the final kind of approval because we want to get our ducks in a row and everything. So we'll see how that's going.
Okay, Diane asked about the role for renewable energy sources to minimize the need for water for data centers, and how far down the line is that? How quickly can that be brought up? Wind
I'm
and
answering a
solar.
lot. You can do it, Peg.
Well, we're just so far behind, right? We're trying to get renewables online, just like we're trying to get everything online, and it will reduce the need for water once we get going. But I think we've got a bunch of them on deck, and we don't even have, realistically, I mean, I don't have any scientific crunching here, but with 12 of them on deck, realistically, we could probably sustain 4 in the state of Minnesota. Maybe, I don't know, maybe I'm being generous, maybe I'm not being generous enough, but I just don't think that we have the ability long term to support them, especially where they're being proposed at. And it's important. There was a question in the chat also that asked why NDAs. Local officials sign them because there's money involved. Local officials sign them because sometimes they feel important because they're signing an NDA. And they also sign them because the companies threaten not to come if they won't sign them. So if you know you're going to get a big windfall, I think it's all about priorities, right? Because if you're a city council member or you're a county commissioner, your priority is to figure out how to support services in your community or the territory geography you're responsible for. A big part of that is raising money and coming up with the money for hospitals, roads, schools. And these companies are the wealthiest companies in the world, and to them the money that they're putting out in these communities is nothing, and it's a lot to those communities. It solves a lot of their financial problems, and they think of it, their priorities are short term. Most of them are elected officials for a certain period of time, and so you're thinking they're making decisions based on what's best for them and their political position. So maybe that's 2 years, maybe that's 10 years, maybe that's 15 years, but the impacts of their decisions are going to be for the next 40 or 60 or 80 years. And so the perspective that they're making those decisions from is just different, and their priorities are different.
Okay, there's some in here about infrastructure. How do you keep the data centers from requiring so much extra electricity generation and transmission and water treatment infrastructure that it makes all those much more expensive for the citizens of the area?
That's a big question. So we did have some, at least for energy this year in Minnesota, some laws that were passed that are going to try and make sure at least energy costs are not shifted to actual like regular folks, regular residential users. I think it remains to be seen how that goes. There's nothing currently in Minnesota law that would do the same for water. And I think there's a couple, I think I saw some questions in the chat too. Hopefully this isn't getting too far off track of like who's paying, right, who's paying for this infrastructure. Um, if you're not asking those questions, you can't really, there's nothing in Minnesota currently that would require a data center necessarily to pay for it, from my understanding. So, yeah,
It's your local community who's negotiating the project that would have to put that in there.
yeah,
The other thing
yeah,
you also too want to really be thinking about is technology generation. The generation of technology changes so quickly. You're looking at a 2 to 4 year window, and it's got a whole new generation of technology that is there. So the other thing communities need to be aware of is abandoned infrastructure. So your community puts in all these resources to expand your wastewater treatment plant, or your water facilities, or your energy facilities for that matter. And then there's nothing that keeps that company to stay in your community. They could leave the infrastructure there. You do have a say though about things like ratepayers. Like, you can go to your utility and you can make sure that your utility is not financing this project on the backs of the other utility consumers. We just see energy rates going up all over the country. Like in Georgia, for example, their data centers are concentrated in just a couple counties, but the cost burden of energy across the state has gone up double digits for like all the users of energy in the state of Georgia. So those are things that you can negotiate in your state at the state level, or even in your community for your municipalities. Those are things that you want to be aware of.
I understand that even if the data center isn't near you, your electricity costs may go way up from the infrastructure and transmission and production costs, because everything goes through a great big grid called MISO in our area that extends from Canadian provinces to Louisiana.
Right.
Tell me about that.
No, I think that's just it. I don't know how deep you want to go, because it is kind of a nerdy rabbit hole to go down. But for example, I can tell you, I was on a webinar just the other day, and the data centers and wastewater, for example, if you're in a metro area like the Twin Cities area, there's multiple counties that are serviced by the metro area, and they share the wastewater treatment plant. So all of those counties are sharing the burden of the wastewater expansion to accommodate data centers in the case of Minnesota, for example. So it just depends on where you're at and how things are structured. If you're a rural electric cooperative and you're in the rural electric cooperative territory, cooperatives were designed to share the cost of the infrastructure by all the users. Why should residential users be paid for data centers expansion on an infrastructure in a rural electric cooperative market, for example?
Thank you. Thank you both. I really appreciate your expertise and all the information that you've given us. It's time for us to wind down the Q&A. There are a lot of questions that we weren't able to answer. And for those of you who came into this webinar late, if you register, when it goes into our website, the link will come out to you by email. Since I can't give you all the questions that people had in the chat, can you tell us about more education that will be available to people? I understand Cure is going to do some of that.
Go ahead, Sarah.
Yes, we will. And I'm sorry, I was trying to do some of the questions as I was going, but it didn't work. So yes, Kira is having, I believe it's at least 5 webinars, a series of webinars, 6. Okay, I thought so. Of 6 series of 6 webinars. We're trying to fit them in as best we can before the Minnesota legislative session starts, which is mid-February. So we're going to cover a bunch of different topics. Our first one is tomorrow night about Data Practices Act requests and NDAs and transparency writ large. But we're also going to talk about energy, more about water, and community impacts as well. So I know that we should have had the link. We will get that link out to you, that it can be sent out. So if you want to sign up for any of those, we would love to have you join us. Oh, and we're having one on community benefits plans as well.
So you'll
And
deal with a
we'll
lot of these
be
questions in more detail in your upcoming webinars.
And the webinars will be with others as well. We have partners that are other organizations that we work with, both in Minnesota and across the country, that will be joining us on various topics, depending on what they are. It won't be just Sarah and I doing all of them. Don't worry.
Okay.
As lovely as we have been with you tonight and want to be with you, we've got lots of colleagues working on this issue at CURE, as well as partners that are very knowledgeable about it as well.
And I see that Cure series link just went into the chat box. So good. But you can get it by Googling Cure too. So, and don't use an AI when you Google them. Thank you so much, Peg and Sarah. We really appreciate this. And I think now we have to close this down. Mary Ellen, do you have anything else to say, or is this pretty much it?
This is it. Thank you both for being with us.
Bye.
Thanks for having
you.
us.
Bye.